any British military personnel who are in Bahrain, if it does come to a war, they are legitimate targets of the Bahraini patriots. Of course they are. If we're not pacifists, then we've got to fight.
BCFM.
As I said at the top of the hour, Private Eye talk about satanic ritual abuse as a fantasy. These crimes are too hideous to be true. But are they? Back in the 1980s, the Conservative MP for Huddersfield, and he actually moved his constituency to a nearby constituency because the boundaries changed as well. His name was Geoffrey Dickens. And Martin, this really, what he did is he took several dossiers to Leon Brittan, who was the Home Secretary, who promptly lost them.
Well, I mean, this has been ongoing for a long time, isn't it? And they just keep trying to kick it into the long grass.
What are your thoughts about... because we heard from Mark Watts, was it 3 weeks ago now, that this latest, what they call national inquiry, which actually doesn't include Scotland anymore or Northern Ireland anymore, and the various pieces are being taken off it as it sort of goes along. Mm-hmm. And he was saying effectively it's being ridiculously denuded, although it may come up with some answers. It's going to take ages. And his main point, I think, was the idea of the Home Office effectively investigating itself, because the Home Office has been at the heart of some of the previous cover-ups of this VI paedophile scandal.
Yeah, well, as you know, inquiries in Britain are no longer independent of the executive. They never were entirely independent, if you think about the first Bloody Sunday inquiry and so on. But, of course, they've been made more. And so inquiries just become a way of saying, oh, we're having an inquiry, so there's nothing to talk about here, just shut up and get it and go away. And then the inquiry takes years and years and years, and it doesn't do anything, and that's the whole point of it. Nothing gets done.
Well... I mean, these issues have to be dealt with one way or another, whether it's through the police. I'll just ask you now to make sure your radio is turned down if children are around, because we'll be hearing tonight from Geoffrey Dickens himself, speaking in the 1980s in an anonymous, at least the name of it is not known, but it was a documentary shown on British television. And here is Geoffrey Dickens himself.
My club became a hangout.
Actually, no, that wasn't Geoffrey Dickens. This is.
When I spoke out in the House of Commons in London about this, many of the members of Parliament smirked and jeered behind their hands because they were unwilling to believe. NSPCC, which is our National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, their inspectors that look after children at risk all over the country were reporting that throughout the United Kingdom they were finding evidence of satanic abuse. And so that really reaffirmed what I've been telling the House of Commons.
Jim Phillips was a doctor of medicine with the police force before he opened his own private practice in Birmingham. Lately, he's more and more focused on victims of abuse in early childhood. He's achieved tremendous results with people who've been regarded hopeless cases within traditional psychotherapy. Perhaps he's most well known for his treatment of patients with multiple personality disorder.
All Satanists have been abused as children. All. I can't imagine any normal person going into something so horrific, vile, disgusting, so violent, humiliating. It's impossible.
As the children disclosed, I became more and more distressed at what they were telling me, and not a little frightened myself, in fact, because they were telling me things that you only saw in horror films and read in fictitious books.
And so a breakdown in communication, a breakdown in co-working happened in Nottinghamshire, and that became a cause which the nation began to take notice of.
That I had to do was sacrifice one of my own children. I'm trying. I was about 16, been going out with this girl that was involved in Satanism. She fell pregnant, and the same day that the child was born, I had to kill it.
A child, when it is first born, is innocent and pure. It's untouched, it's unspoilt. Nothing bad has ever entered that child. That child's thoughts are pure. So they sacrificed that to the devil as the child being pure. Because all things pure are feared by Satanists and also by the devil. So if you've got something pure and you destroy it, you take away the purity and there's no longer a threat there.
They really do think that if they can take away innocence and give it to Satan, that they're giving him the greatest gift of all. They do it for all kinds of reasons. The first reason is to dirty the child inside and out, and the second reason is to destroy the innocence.
Where is the proof? Where are the traces? Where are the bodies?
One former witch who revealed to me that she had actually been present while a child was sacrificed said they do it in a different way. Normally, the high priest has relationships with some of the witches in the coven, and they produce a child. And when that child is born, it's never registered as born, and therefore no one knows that child even came into the world. And I was told it was some of those children that were sacrificed.
I would be telephoned by someone to say, we've got a young woman who thinks she's had a baby but can't quite remember. Is this possible? Is it possible for things to happen to you that you've forgotten and you're beginning to remember? So I would say, it is possible, let's talk about it. And gradually the story would emerge of a young woman in her 20s who may have had anything up to 6 babies as a young girl between the ages of 11, 12, up to their early 20s, which were aborted and used for sacrifice in a variety of ways in covens.
The same thing happens in ritualistic abuse. Yes, you stood and watched that baby be sacrificed and you didn't do anything about it. You actually abused the person next door to you. You actually subjected them to all kinds of sexual perversions. You were involved in that particular sexual orgy that took place. You can't have been objected to it. You were part of it.
The barristers representing the children said, if we fill the minds of the jury with all this mumbo-jumbo about Satanism, devil worship and black witchcraft, the members of the jury won't believe a word the child is saying. Indeed, some of them wouldn't wish to believe a word the child was saying, and the case would break down.
Some children claim that they have seen babies microwaved. In other words, put in a microwave oven, and they have said it then fizzled and whatever.
People have often said to me, you know, how do I know that children aren't lying? How do social workers and doctors and everybody? Well, a very low percentage of children lie about this particular kind of problem, or any kind of child sexual abuse. Sometimes because of their tender years, they don't even have the know-how to put this into words unless they've experienced it. And because you know the fear mechanisms around the child cannot be done in any artificial way, that these children are genuinely, absolutely terrified. If you talk to them, and I have talked to witches, I have talked to people who've been still in, are really subconsciously quite frightened and fearful of what they're doing to their children, but they don't seem to be able to stop it. I once had an experience where a black witch actually rang me up and said her son was about to attain the age of 7 years old and was to be initiated, and could I save her son?
Nurses, doctors, lawyers, there was judges that I'd been up in court in front of involved.
I have never yet met a happy Satanist. They are very unhappy people. They usually have drugs or drink problems. They wander the earth looking for some purpose in life and gaining nothing. And I have heard from other Satanists that quite a high proportion of them do kill themselves in the end. So I really cannot understand why anybody would get into such a destructive way of life.
Now, that was a clip there from a documentary in the 1980s, including several bits of an interview with the Conservative MP Geoffrey Dickens, who handed this paedophile dossier, in fact several, to the Home Secretary Leon Brittan. Martin, after he'd done that, rather than investigate, Leon Brittan then lost those dossiers. Obviously, he's in charge of a big department, the Home Office. But the problem was that he was then phoned up with death threats, this MP was, and also had his home burgled a couple of times. So, I mean, this also coincided, I suppose, with a lot of kind of the shutdown of a lot of the mainstream media's investigative journalism around the late 80s, early 90s. Some of the last really good documentaries were being made by people like the BBC. But by the latest cover-up does almost make you want to, as I'm doing tonight, revisit some of these older problems that we've had in the past.
Well, I think the problem with the stuff of satanic sexual abuse and so on is that it's one kind of abuse. And there's all sorts of other kinds as well, and we shouldn't get hung up about that it's some kind of, it's all to do with Satanism, because for some of it may be, but a lot of it isn't. I mean, the King Cora Boys Home in Northern Ireland, which of course has been excluded from the latest investigation, all the evidence there suggests that MI5 were using it in order to blackmail various people that they wanted to blackmail, and that's what was going on.
It also seems to be a deliberate attempt to sort of mix up witchcraft and Satanism and almost try and make one.
Well, there's an attempt to make it all sound more incredible. I think what I think is fundamental underlying all of this is that sexual abuse of children has been used as a tool of blackmail by the intelligence services, and that's what we're talking about, VI paedophilia. The people at the top have all, as many of them have been compromised as a result of having sex with underage children, and therefore they're then politically pliable, and that's why it's been covered up, because it's basically a standard modus operandi of the intelligence services.
One of the police officers there was talking about an inquiry in Nottinghamshire in the 1980s, which apparently didn't get very far. It seems we have inquiry after inquiry after inquiry, but we never can get to the hub of the problem. And what I'm suggesting really is that the Home Office is one of the biggest institutions which is at the heart of the problem.
Well, they will have these networks are embedded within the establishment and orchestrated by the intelligence services. They're in a very strong position to either prevent any investigation or to thwart any independent investigation that actually starts.
There's been various attempts over the years. I mean, that was from the 80s. In the 1990s, Roger Cook, the investigative journalist, did a programme where he also looked into satanic ritual abuse, which is just one form, as you said, Martin, of abuse. And one of the psychotherapists who's takes this very seriously is Valerie Sinison, and she said that certain of the accusations against Jimmy Savile really did prove that this kind of abuse, he was involved in this kind of abuse, which it shouldn't be entirely surprising to anyone that's read up on the whole Savile scandal. But this is from Roger Cook in the 1990s, and this short clip here is from a documentary called The Devil's Work, which went out on ITV. Central Television produced it.
Tonight we seek out those who do the devil's work.
Satanism is on the increase. In fact, it's going through an explosion at the present time, and has been over the last 30 years.
So Satan's PR is pretty good.
Satan's PR is doing a very good job these days, and the problem is the churches are not combating it as they should do.
We wanted to question Chris Bray about his publication, The Lamp of Thoth, which has carried want ads for dead bodies, articles advocating sacrificial murder, and is the platform for Michael Aquino's new British recruiting drive.
Satan screwed up my life completely, and I'm fortunate because I got out.
People who've had to counsel those who were victims.
My children have seen evil and been touched by evil, and thankfully now they are beginning to know some other life.
The feeling of wanting vengeance.
They've had ritualistic things done to them with snakes, with crucifixes. They've been taught to pray to the devil. They were in fact brainwashed.
Most of these people are too frightened to be identified. Some of the children are wards of court and may not be identified.
Jesus, we ask that you will be with
Amongst the victims is the 12-year-old son of Jean Bolonovsky.
That you will give them your protection, that you will...
Well, he'd been made to eat human secretion. He'd been drugged. It's changed his whole attitude. He's petrified of going out on his own and things now. When it first all come out, they told him if he ever told anyone what happened to him, they'd kill me and they'd kill him. So that's one of the reasons he dared talk about it. Plus, whenever we did go out, he kept saying there was somebody following him and he was turning round all the time. In the end, he couldn't cope with it. One night he set his bedroom alight, saying that he had to burn the devil out. And he was just totally wrecked by the whole mess.
It makes me feel angry and sad. Angry that some people can treat children and susceptible adults in this way. And sad because those children are going to have to live a life affected by what these adults have done.
In a way, Martin, it's all about fear, this, isn't it? Because whether or not these claims are correct, the idea is that people actually don't want to think about it, and those who are involved in it are afraid that there'll be retribution if they talk about it or go to the police.
Well, the fact of the matter is, Tony, that hundreds of children every year in this country are killed by their carers. It's been going on for a very long time, and that's just before we get to the more extravagant...
And if we look at some of these recent inquiries, many of those abused children were in the care system, supposedly under the care of the government. I mean, particularly that Rotherham inquiry. Yeah. And a lot of it, that didn't really come out so much at the time, but almost all the children involved in that were in care homes. Yeah,
because in actual fact, evil people target those kind of children. I mean, there's lots of people go missing every year, and those people tend to be people... I mean, do you remember Fred West killing all of those single women? And they were all single women who'd run away from home or come out of care. They didn't have any relatives, and so they disappeared, and nobody even knew they'd gone. And I'm afraid there is a huge underbelly of our society where all this stuff goes on, but the VIP paedophile stuff is related to people at the top, and as I said to you earlier, that's to do with the intelligence services manipulating.
I mean, will they be
them.
saying, hang on, this is national security, we can't allow an inquiry into
well,
this?
It's not just that's one of the ways they'll try and block inquiries, but in actual fact they've used this as a mechanism for blackmailing political figures and other senior people from the get-go, and it's a standard procedure that that's what the King Corra Boys Home investigation was all about. And of course it's been taken out of the inquiry because that's probably the most politically sensitive of all. But of course boys from King Corra said that they weren't just abused in King Corra, they were taken over to the other side of the water, to this side of the water, and were abused in Britain as well as in Northern Ireland.
Well, there was also the Franklin scandal over in the United States. I mean, it's easy to say, isn't it, oh well, this sort of thing doesn't happen anymore, but the chances are
no social worker working in this country would say that child abuse doesn't happen. Of course it happens all the time, and there's far too much of it. But of course we can't. But there is supposedly a whole, policing system and social work system to try and get on top of it. But of course the VIP paedophile scandal is more to do with the establishment blackmailing itself, so that therefore politicians and others will do as they're told when we go to war with Iraq or whatever it is.
The police play a key role in all of this, of course, absolutely necessary, and in certain occasions resources have been taken away from child protection teams within the police. Also, we've seen this week, Martin, in some footage of Israeli policemen who are basically going in and beating people up. And you do wonder, I mean, they're Palestinians, so obviously those police were racist police. And in some way, you do wonder, I mean, who do you call if the police are beating you up? You can't call the police.
Well, this is an issue, isn't it? Is there a way of dealing with a situation or a problem by working through the system? You've got to try, but of course if you can't, then you take other steps, and of course that's what happened in Northern Ireland in the late 60s. People realised that the state wasn't going to treat this stuff seriously, and they took the law into their own hands with all the consequences that subsequently followed.
We've seen time and again actually police both in this country, the States, in other places, actually taking advantage of the position where it's actually as almost a kind of form of impunity for the police that are very unlikely to be prosecuted. A couple of weeks ago we heard on the 9/11 special from Aaron Russo. He was the film producer, but he also, before he became a film producer, ran a nightclub in Chicago. And so I thought it'd be interesting to have a listen now to his experience with the US police.
My club became a hangout for the hippies, and because they wanted to go to Chicago and protest what was going on. And I was having a concert at my club one night to raise money, and the police raided the nightclub, my club, for no reason at all. And I was standing outside in my office overlooking the street, and I saw all these paddy wagons pulling up in front of my club. And I was a 24-year-old kid. I had no experience at all, really. I said, what are these paddy wagons doing here? And then I saw all these cops getting out of the paddy wagons coming into my club. I said, oh my God, they're raiding me. And so I ran down to the stage, and I got on the stage, and I stopped the band from playing. And I said to the people in the audience, we're being raided, so sit down on the floor, cooperate, and pull out your identification and cooperate with the police. And as I said that, two of the cops from behind threw me onto the floor and grabbed me and started dragging me out of the club. I'm going, victory, victory, I'm playing it for what it was worth at the time. I was a kid. And then I saw the fire department there, and the fire department was dumping garbage cans, the garbage all over the floor. And I thought to myself, well, why are they doing that? Very quickly as they were dragging me out. And I didn't quite understand it. So they threw me into the paddy wagon. As I got into the paddy wagon, one of the cops grabbed my testicles from behind and squeezed, and I went into the paddy wagon in gigantic pain. And the next person that came into the paddy wagon, the cop, as he was stepping in, the cops took the billy club, smashed him on the head with it, and just split his skull. For no reason. I mean, there was nothing wrong.
So that was kind of your awakening.
That was my awakening. Like, what is going on? I thought this was America. So I initially blamed it on Chicago and made a daily thing. It was Chicago. And anyway, it was the headlines of the newspapers the next day. There was my picture in the newspapers, the headlines, electric theater short-circuited, it was raided. And in the article, they went ahead and they said that the reason they raided the club was because the fire department came there and saw it was messy, full of garbage, and the hippies started attacking them, which was totally not true.
Those dirty hippies?
It was totally false. It was a complete fabrication.
So they ran a false flag on you. They framed you.
Yeah, of course. And I was in shock. I said, people lie like that? People actually do these things? I couldn't believe it. It was an awakening to me. And I went on television, I told people on television that they lied. Nobody cared. Nobody cared what the truth was. It was shocking to me. And then a week or 2 weeks later, I forget exactly what it was, two cops come to see me, a lieutenant and a sergeant, a captain and a sergeant. And they said, Mr. Russo, we're sorry if you got hurt that night at the club in the raid, but we're here to tell you that if you want to keep the club open, it's going to take $2,000 a month, and we're going to come see you once a month, and whenever we have to raid you, we're going to call you, and we'll let you know we're going to come in tonight and raid you.
This was mafia.
Well, the police mafia, And actually, it was actually more interesting that they said, listen, there's the A plan, there's the B plan, and there's the super deluxe plan. And this one will cost you, each one will cost you that much money a month. Which one do you want?
What was the super deluxe?
That's the one I took. That was a $2,000 a month plan. And I took that plan, and I paid them $2,000 a month, and they left me alone. And whenever they were going to raid the club, they would come there, we're going to have a phony raid tonight, just to look good for the people in the neighborhood,
So that was your first big education?
That was my education into corruption in government, but I really thought that was basically Chicago. I didn't realize it was the whole country was like that. And so that was my wake-up call, that people lie and cheat and steal. And I thought everybody was always honest and nice and decent, and I had no idea about any of these things. Finally, one day they came to me and they said, look, we can't take your money anymore. I said, why, what's up? What's going on? I said, we have to close your club. There's elections coming, and the aldermen in the neighborhood don't want you open anymore. So we can't take your money. So I had to go to court and fight them, and they were trying to close the club. And then one night there was a fire, and the club never reopened again. The club just closed, and that was the end of the club, and they burned me down.
I think it's an interesting story, Martin, but I mean, I think we have to say that there's a different sort of culture here with the police in the UK, but it is worrying when you're telling people to go to the police to sort these sorts of things out, particularly when it comes to child sexual abuse. He's talking there about a kind of police mafia in America, and what worries me more than anything else is that we seem to import a great deal of our policy from the United States.
Well, we're a colony of the United States, Tony. That's why we're going to go to war with Iran, even though nobody in this country's got any interest in it whatsoever. That's why we've created a base in Bahrain, because the Americans want us to, and we just do as we're told. And the fact that this sort of stuff's been going on forever, that doesn't mean that the police are not to be trusted. They've got to prove themselves.
What about
they've got to prove that they are to be trusted.
Aaron's comment there, nobody cared what the truth was?
Well, the problem with criminals of all kinds, whatever level they are in the social hierarchy, is that they're criminals and they don't want to be caught and they don't want people to catch them and they want to get away with what they want to get away with. And, of course, as we very well know, there's one law for the rich and one law for the poor.
Time to sign off now for the Murdoch News at 8. Coming up on Facebook, possibly, is Arabian Nights with Mohammed Bakawi, but it is Ramadan, so maybe not. Thanks to our guests, Cabinet Member for Transport Connectivity, Labour Councillor for Eastville Vari Threlfall, and Lib Dem Councillor Mark Wright. Also thanks to Old Labour Oxford economist Martin Summers. You heard there our sister show Dialects on next Tuesday at noon. This show's page, podcast, story links, comment page is at thisweek.org.uk. You'll find me on Twitter at Tony Gosling. Here's wishing you a relaxing and enjoyable and hot Sunday this weekend. Do please join us for the Bilderberg 2018 Turin Politics Show at 6 o'clock next week. God bless, and don't let the banksters get you down.
Bringing you national news on the hour. Live from the Sky News Centre.